The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
And welcome to Health from the Inside Out. My goodness, what a time we are having right now in our society. And there's so many things happening, so many sources of thought and stress and challenges and trying to make changes, upheaval. We realize that with all of these things happening, something's got to give. And sometimes what is giving is your sanity, your sense of peace, your sense of security, your sense of safety, your sense of community, your sense of home. One beautiful thing is we are seeing how some communities are coming together to support each other through some of these challenges. But we're also seeing that there's some people who may be left behind. So what we'd like to talk about today is about some mental health issues and also some strategies to help you thrive during challenging times. There's no point in trying to survive if we cannot thrive. And let's move further and faster in these challenges and in these opportunities, because it's when we have these opportunities and challenges that we can actually do some of our best work and live our best life. So we have someone here today, as we had last time, who is just a stellar and phenomenal physician in the community. It's Dr. Randall Maxey. You know him as a nephrologist. He's also a community leader. He's also an experienced businessman, and he's got a wide variety of experiences over the years. He's an MD, PhD. He has studied widely, he's traveled widely, and so we're really very honored that he is joining us here at the desk. So I'd like for you to join me, and I'm Dr. Suzanne Cutter, surgical oncologist and general surgeon. I'd like for you to join me in welcoming Dr. Maxey. He is my new partner in crime here. Of course, we don't want to focus on crime, do we? That's probably, a risky thing to say these days. But he's my partner in crime for this time that we have together, and we're going to try to flesh out all the issues that we're seeing today and how we can come up with some ways to help you to thrive in this setting. So,
well,
Dr.
thank you,
Maxey,
Dr. Cutter. And you said something that really impressed me.
Ooh.
And when I go back to my childhood, I always felt safe at home.
Right.
And as I transitioned into a teenager and then a young man and now a senior man, I still have maintained the fact that I knew I could always in my younger years go home. No matter what, I'd be welcomed by my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to maintain that with my children. And that sense of safety that you talked about, the sense of not having a ground floor, is a major problem of our mental being.
Now, you say ground floor. What does ground floor mean to you? I like that phrase, and I don't know if you all picked up on that, but that's actually that's a good phrase, your ground floor, your safety net.
Yeah, and let me go a little bit further and explain that the National Medical Association, which is the association of mostly African-American physicians, not totally, but mostly, they have declared that racism is a public health risk. And in that declaration, one of the subtendent circles under that is that if you're not grounded, if you don't have a home base, if you don't have a floor, if you're not welcome at your home, that is a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I do believe that going through these hazardous times with a pandemic, and I used the phrase before, on top of an epidemic, which is our main public health problem with heart disease, diabetes, obesity, etc., and then you add the mental component. And years ago, we used to always think that mental was not the same as physical. But now we know that you can't really distinguish between mental and physical. They're all a part.
You can't separate it. You're right. It's all integrated.
Yeah.
You know, and one impacts the other.
Yeah.
Does it not?
So when we have we're threatened by our own safety because our home, our country, our world sees us as not human and therefore can perpetrate all sorts of indignities and threats on us, it's hard to be mentally whole, mentally safe, and self-preservation is the first law of biology, I believe. So that becomes the basis for a lot of the mental issues. And we all know that stress generates a lot of medical problems. And we know stress releases a number of detrimental hormones, enzymes, etc. So I think you define that so well.
Thank you. You guys have heard us talk about this in the past. You know, myself and Dr. Kelberman, when he was here with us, we used to talk a lot about the impact of stress and what stress actually does to the physiology and how it changes how the body responds to things. And one of the biggest changes, and from my opinion, especially being a cancer physician, is on the immune system. You know, that stress really tears down the immune system, and it just leaves us vulnerable to so many different things. And so it's for this reason, and not this reason alone, but this is one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about mental health from the standpoint of these stressors. And let's go through the laundry list. You named a couple. You talked about the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. You talked about the epidemic in terms of healthcare disparities, really, you know, healthcare crises, patients in a segment where they are disproportionately suffering from a lot of comorbidities and things like that. But we have some other ones now, right? We have some other things coming to the fore. We have public unrest right now due to incidents related to abuse of force, right? We've seen that in a lot of different areas. We also have financial unrest. A lot of people who are disproportionately being furloughed from their jobs, fired from their jobs, and not able to earn an income, and so therefore they're very vulnerable. And then on top of that, not really having much of a safety net from a financial standpoint on top of that, right?
That's right.
What are some of the other stressors that you're seeing in society right now?
Well, I want to go back to the one about finance.
Okay. That's one of my favorite topics.
I have in my many slide decks, I have one slide that always comes to mind. Mm. And that slide shows that for every $123,000 of wealth that Caucasians have, blacks have 33 cents.
Right. So there's actually a tenfold gap. That's the current number now. There's a tenfold gap from a wealth standpoint between, if you just look at black and white. I think it's more
than tenfold. 123,000 to 0.33.
There's a tenfold gap. This is what the Brookings Institute is publishing right now. They're saying there's a tenfold gap. This came out in February of this year. So, excuse me, there may be a little variation in the data, or maybe there's a different source or different way that it's counted. But the bottom line is there is a gap. And when they looked at those two groups, they also looked at Asians and also Latinos. But when they looked at those groups, it really showed up from the standpoint of lack of inheritance. Inheritance is the buffer for, financial difficulties for, everyday people, because we all have ups and downs in life. If you don't have an inheritance, you don't have a buffer. They also talked about the difficulties with home ownership, how there's these African Americans or blacks are less likely to own homes. And it's not because they don't have the income, but they've also shown that there's a banking disparity. So banks look at two people, different races, same income, same profile, but they're more likely to give this person a loan over that person. And so that's a stressor, too, that you can't get ahead and, there's more taxes and all of those burdens. So that's what they're showing in terms of some of the causes.
Yeah, I don't know that I trust Brookings too much for their data.
That's fine.
But in my understanding, this wealth gap, if you've been collecting rent or lease money since the year 1000, that builds up an unscalable disparity in wealth. So the wealth didn't just start with the creation of the United States of America, but in fact was antecedent to that. Way back. And then that was brought over when the United States was just a colony, that the original test of a man or citizenry was one who had been granted land by King George. And that wasn't necessarily just ethnic or racial, but that's how it was ultimately calculated that black men were counted as 3/4 of a person. So you're right that there's a gap, but it's almost an impossible, and it's different than wealth or riches. This is long-standing wealth that actually comes before the creation of this country, but it was carried over and multiplied more. But you're right, that safety net is so important to one's mental ability to feel safe. And your ability to feel safe can compromise how you succeed in future life.
Or that the inability to really succeed and reach your potential, the frustration associated with that, can also ruin your safety net, right? It's like I'm saying, it's that lack of inheritance, generation to generation, and so no safety net there. The lack of things like home ownership and all of those things. Those are things that really contribute to creating the environment from a financial standpoint.
Right.
So,
right. And I'll tell you another thing, and this is unfortunately maybe a good part of it, and I'll use you as an example.
Please don't. It's always present company excluded, so use some other person, please.
Physicians like Dr. Cutter are probably well intellectually above most of her contemporaries of other race groups, because in order to get where she's gotten, she had to be 2, 3 times as good. It's like when you go into a bank and you see the bank manager, who's usually a second vice president. He probably is a high school graduate. When you go into that bank across the street and there's a black guy who's the head of the bank, he's probably got a PhD in finance and accounting. We've been forced to be better just to be like the old boys club, or old girls club. So most of your...
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no old girls club. Okay, let's just make that clear. Women are still trying to get some parity in terms of income. Now, you cannot, let's not even go there. There is no old girls club. There's just a bunch of women out there studying hard, trying to advance, and trying to even make the same dollar in the same job. Women don't even make the same dollar in a given job. So you can't let's not go down that pathway.
Right. But no, the point
that's
I'm
another
making
stressor.
is that your average black professional will be more than qualified than his white counterpart in many cases.
Okay,
because
we
they
hear
had
you,
to
Dr.
work
Maxey.
harder. Okay.
Heard that.
It's true.
Okay. So I think it's it's helpful to kind of outline the different stressors and the different sources of the stressors, right? And what impact that has. What are you seeing in terms of, what do you think some of the biggest stressors are with COVID-19? A lot of people talk about fear. They're afraid to go out, or they're afraid to, touch certain people, in different parts of the country. I think in some populations, they have a false sense of security, and we've seen that a lot with the demonstrations. People are feeling like, well, I need to demonstrate, so we can just suspend this whole social distancing thing. And so, what are you seeing as some of the biggest stressors associated with COVID-19 these days?
Well, I think the biggest stressor is being concerned about personal survival. And as I said before, one is always most concerned about themselves. That's just the law of biology. You have to be. The next stressor is your concern about those that you love, your family, your children, your parents, aunts, and uncles. And
so
I think
self,
those
health,
are major.
Family, what are some of the other things?
Then you go to finance, business, work, profession. They come down the line. Now, as a responsible family person, you have to be concerned, am I going to be able to feed my family, discharge my obligations? As a mother, you've got to discharge your obligations. As a father, you have to discharge your obligations. So you have that dichotomy between being physically and health-wise safe and then being able to eat. And then down line from that, you have to eat with a certain healthiness to keep your immune system up, which loops back around. So
right,
it's a
does.
multifaceted issue. How do I keep myself safe? How do I keep my house paid for, my apartment paid for? How do I maintain my children if I have children? Or how do I keep my relationship if she's shut in across town and I'm shut in over here? How do we keep our personal relationships up in this pandemic?
Right.
And a word that does bother me, we've always talked about health disparities. I'm more concerned with optimum health, not just the difference in my health and the guy next to me. That may only be a little bit.
You said optimum health?
Optimum health.
So you mean optimum as for an individual,
yes.
Optimum individual health.
Right.
So taking it away from a group and putting it on the individual.
Right. In other words, I'm concerned that I'm the best that I can be. Now, if that means I'm better or worse than somebody else is not, that does not matter. It only matters how good I can be with my health. So I would strive for optimum health, not just compare myself to somebody else.
So then let's talk about that. Let's talk about, ways that people can, focus on their optimal health from a mental health standpoint. What are some of the things they can do in light of, let's say, for the pandemic or the epidemic, the healthcare issues epidemic with, diabetes and hypertension and all of those things? What are some of the things that people can do to cope with all of that?
Well, first of all, I think you have to have a mindset that is healthy. Now, I personally believe that the type of mindset that I was taught as a child had to do with certain beliefs, certain spirituality, that is above things that are physical, but not instead of. But I believe that there is a creator that I can have confidence in, but that also requires that I do what's necessary to maintain my body, my mind, and my life. So my advice to people first is have a sense of what we call eustress. Now, people have distress. Eustress is when you don't have that. Now, there is no way to avoid some stressors in your life.
And
it's a matter of how you handle it.
Yeah, some stress can be good. You can channel stress if you want to.
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah.
But it's how you handle stress. So part of that is just not freaking out.
So don't freak out, okay? We're kind of, everybody's kind of in a similar boat, and it's from a certain standpoint. This is kind of a stressful time, and I think some nerves and things are kind of on the edge and maybe a little frayed. So I think that's actually pretty good advice. Don't freak out.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
And this may be unfair. You're at 30,000 feet in a Boeing 767, and it's bumpy.
I like a bumpy ride.
Extraordinarily bumpy.
Okay.
Okay. How do you handle that?
You relax. You relax and you say, look, what is the serenity prayer about, having that wisdom to know the difference between things you can change and the things that you can't change. And if you're in a situation where you can't change it, the best thing to do is relax and to focus on what you can do. Is that a good time to make a phone call, send a text message, call your broker, call your spouse? I mean,
Call your insurance man.
Your insurance company, make sure the premium's paid, And I'm being a little bit comical, but the point of it is, you just relax into it. It doesn't really do any good to, as you said, freak out in the face of something that challenging. What you can do is get very focused and clear-minded and figure out a way, how can I thrive in this situation? Is there a parachute on board? Can I get out of this plane and into the air on a parachute before we hit? Is there going to be some water underneath? Is this going to be one of those Sully landings, like Captain Sullenberg? You just don't know. But freaking out doesn't help anything, right?
For example, I learned when I was an intern, our symbol, our sound waves for the hospital I was in, if there was a cardiac arrest someplace in the hospital, they would say 777. This is before code blue or after code blue, I don't know.
Okay.
And our boss told us, the first thing you should do is slow down. Don't go running to the emergency. But use that time to walk to the emergency and figure out what you're going to do when you get to the emergency.
Right.
As opposed to running 100 miles an hour, skidding to a stop and
what do we do now? I've seen people do that, though. I've seen people run, and they get there, and they're just kind of like deer in the headlights. It takes a while to kind of bring the adrenaline down and start to think.
And so then if you look at the way the human body does work, there's a lesson there. When you are faced with a frightening, threatening situation, your body does certain things that will allow certain hormones to give you more strength.
I love this. Yes.
Certain hormones to make you not, we're doctors, we can talk, make you not urinate, make your heart moderate in a certain way.
Visual acuity.
Visual acuity. So everything is ready to fight or flight or whatever you need to do. Also
known as the saber-toothed tiger response, right? Okay. When there used to be a saber-toothed tiger, that's what used to happen. So,
in fact, there's an old African story that says if you're a gazelle, you wake up in the morning, you got to wake up running, because if you don't run, you're going to get eaten by a lion.
That's right.
And if you're a lion, you wake up running, because if you don't catch that gazelle,
you're not
going to go
eat.
hungry.
So just think of, but that's an interesting analogy, because I think some people feel chronically like a gazelle, right? Like society, like this world, like, everything is kind of chasing after them, chasing them down day in, day out. I was listening to a radio station this week, and they were just interviewing people about their experiences, their experiences in the country and things that they, that hurt them from a racial standpoint. And one guy was an African-American guy, and he was talking about how he had come into work, he had his headphones on, he had a T-shirt on of the company he worked for in the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he had his ID on that said where he worked. And he gets to the door, and there's a security guard. This is 2 years ago. And the guard stops him, and he's never seen this guard before or anything. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, I'm going to work. And he said, "Well, where do you work?" He told him. So they have this exchange, right? And the guard just keeps asking him question after question. Well, he made him call his supervisor. And he said, your supervisor needs to come out of the mall. Now, I don't know if any of you guys have been to the Mall of America, but it's huge. It's like, it's like a city in there. But he wanted the manager to come out of the mall to this entrance to come and get this African-American employee to bring him to work where he's been for 2 years. So the person refused to let him in spite of the ID, and told him, I don't believe you. I don't believe you have a job here. And so that's what it feels like to wake up as a gazelle. Like you're always on the run. How do you handle yourself in that situation? What do you do about that? Do you get angry? You feel angry, or do you feel less than yourself? Are you feeling bad about yourself because what did I do to bring on this kind of criticism? And then that's like a little tiny, what do they call those, microaggressions? That's like a little tiny issue, but those little tiny things can build up over the course of a day, a week, a month, a year, a career, and they can really haunt a person, So
I think that training your mind to be resistant or resilient.
I like that, resilient. That's
to
good.
Those types of responses. Now, I know some old-time boxers were said to soak their faces in salt water to make their face tougher so they wouldn't cut or bruise when they got hit.
Oh, I thought it was oil so that the gloves slid off. No,
no, they want to make it tough.
I got that wrong.
But the point is that we may have to advise our children and ourselves that there are going to be these insults. There are going to be these assaults. And you've got to be above them. And until things change, and we don't know how soon that will be, you've got to be above it. And you have to have a strategy of how you deal with the put down. Well, I had a talk with my oldest son years ago, and he says he gets upset when somebody doesn't respect him or if they disrespect him. I said, that's strange.
How old was your son at that time of the conversation?
He was about 10.
About 10. Okay.
So I said, why do you need somebody to respect you? As long as you respect yourself.
Right.
So you should be internally motivated. And I've turned that around to say that anybody who doesn't respect me, they must be an idiot.
There's got to be something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you.
Go the other way.
My mother used to tell me that when I was in, I think I was in high school or something. You come home and you talk about a situation, and she would always tell me, let that be their problem. Don't take that problem on. When somebody shows you something you don't want to see or you think is unfair or what have you, don't accept that as something that you have to defend. Just allow it to rest with that person and let them deal with it. So you brought up something interesting, though. You started talking about children and how to deal with children with all these stressors and everything. And there's been, a bunch of podcasts and things like that, kids kind of talking about like what their perspectives are and what's been going on. And there have been parents kind of asking, well, what do I do? What can I share with them? And so what some of the kids are saying, these are middle school kids, they're saying, look, we are going to see all this on social media. So it's better for you to talk to us about what's going on than to act like nothing's happening. We need to dialogue with you on this up front. And the other thing that's coming out of, this area is kind of like, well, some people are saying, well, boy, there's some violence out there and the things that are happening and the brutality and things like that. Can we really show our kids these kinds of things? And one person said, well, if they can see a R-rated movie or play, one of those hostile, video games or something like that. Not that there's nothing wrong with video games because it's good for hand-eye coordination, a bunch of other stuff. But I'm just saying some of them are violent. If you allow them to, to do that, horror movies and things like that, they certainly can handle, reality with you by their side, discussing that. What do you think about that as a
There are two things that come to mind when you say
Okay.
One is the role of endorphins.
Okay.
And we know that mental status, mental set is not just happenstance, but the levels of certain hormones that affect your brain are very important. It's been learned in recent years that there's a hormone called serotonin, and it can affect whether you're depressed or not depressed or whatnot. There are hormones that I'm going to call them endorphins that elevate when you exercise.
Love those.
And once you start exercising and running, you almost have to keep doing it. They're addictive in a way. And so many times when we're telling people to keep your immune system up, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But to keep your mental system up, that you continue, even though you may not be going to a gym right now, but if you keep your endorphins up by physical exercise, and I'm talking to me as much as anybody.
We got to get you taking those daily walks.
Yes, that will help your overall mental status, your ability to handle anxiety and stressors.
You think that's good also for kids? Is that what you're
Oh,
saying? You think that's good for kids?
Beings. Yeah.
So getting them active and things like that. I saw one parent who, with the pandemic, what they did was they set up a little schedule for their kids. They did some homeschooling in the morning, and then it was like they had an activity, and then they did some homework, and then they all went to the soccer field. And they, the parents ran, the kids ran, they did all this stuff, for a couple of hours. They had a whole program where they included, what you're saying, that physical activity in the day, and they did it together.
There's a word that I heard Reverend Al Sharpton use in a video that I looked at a week or so ago.
Interesting.
And I'm not quite sure of the real definition of the word indignant. But he said that our reaction, the way minorities and especially blacks should react to racism, is a sustained indignance.
Okay.
Not anger, but indignant in a way that your response to somebody doing something or calling something, you don't have to call them back. In fact, when you tend to ignore or not react to a person doing that, that tends to hurt them more, because most times they're doing it
to get a reaction.
A reaction.
But how do you square that? You're saying on one hand, be indignant, and on the other hand, don't react.
No,
so what does that mean?
No, I didn't. I didn't say don't react, but you're not reacting with violence. You're not reacting with an attitude. You're just saying in your mind, which will reflect how you act. Are you crazy? Are you stupid?
So what do you tell
moving.
a kid? What do you tell a kid who is experiencing that at school? Some type of...
You teach them first self-love.
Beautiful. That's beautiful.
And you teach them that they are God's child and they're your child. And that they are capable of anything. And nobody is better than they are. You have to also tell them they're not better than anybody else either. You don't want a superiority complex, which is generally an inferiority complex.
Right.
That gives them a certain amount of armament when they know that no matter what anybody does, they can't take away what God and you have given them on the inside. So that protects them. Then with the other things we can do, like with the endorphins, the exercise, them being safe. And, people test safety. I mean, you can tell a kid
it's
that
true.
You're always welcome at home, but if you lock the door...
It says something different, like, only when I'm not busy, I don't have company over. No.
So, like, I have a habit. All of my children are adults. But when they call, barring in any emergency situation, if I'm doing brain surgery, which doesn't happen very often, I answer that call on the first ring. Now, I may say I'm busy, I may have to do something, but I definitely know that they can get through to me, and I'll determine what happens then. But that's very important to let them have that access and know that they are so important to you.
Right.
That's part of the safety net.
And I think, I think what you're saying, it's really more of a paradigm, because it's not so much that people, everybody feels like, well, I can call my parent and they pick up on the first ring, but it's some level of consistency.
Yes.
And that's what it is. It's really the consistency. So, if you go home, you're going to get, I don't know, your favorite dinner, or if you call, you're going to get an answer in the next couple of hours or whatever it is. So being consistent with your kids and really kind of setting them up with a whole environment of self-love and self-appreciation, which also is a reflection of love of community and appreciation for others. I mean, and you said something earlier that's really important. You talked about the superiority behavior and how that's really an inferiority complex. And that's so true. And I think that's one thing that is good for kids to realize, and maybe even some adults, that people who behave in a superior manner, what's really behind that is that inferiority complex, that fear of being found out, that fear. What do you say to that?
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, you want to give your family and your children as much as you can the benefit of the doubt. But I heard this story about this woman, but I could make it a man, who was
a
watching,
human being. No, I'm kidding.
who was watching a parade of 1,000 soldiers. And this mother says, goodness, all those people are out of step except my son.
But it's beautiful to have that filter for your kids. I mean, not to be completely, lose a sense of reality, but, to be supportive, to be there and to be supportive. And that's important.
To your point about what's going on with the mental status of Americans in general.
Yes.
But especially those that are the victims of racism. And my understanding of racism, it is prejudice with the authority to enforce a negative. All of us have a certain degree of prejudice, or maybe dislike for those who aren't like us,
or some type of a bias, or
but
something.
Racism has the component of being able to act upon that prejudice in a way that affects many people. Dick Gregory used to say that there's white people, and then there are people who are white. And he said, I'm not talking about people who are white. Y'all are my friends. Y'all are good. But a real white person is one who can step outside the room, make a phone call, and the stock market drops 10 points. That is the power of racism, which is systemic and starts from the top down. It is not just prejudice, but the ability to enforce that prejudice on millions of people, thousands of people under them. So when somebody wants to make you feel unsafe, there was once a court decision back who said there are no rights that a black man has that a white man needs to respect. Another recent article said that a mayor here in California said that there has never been a shooting or harm come to a black man of goodwill. So with those issues out there, those are the things we have to protect our community from and our children from. And those are the things that made the NMA declare that racism was a public health risk factor because it kills people. It makes people mentally ill and physically ill.
Let's talk about that a little bit. You're bringing up racism, and, that's really on the tongues of so many people right now. And what I think is beautiful about what's happening is, in a way, this is the Rainbow Coalition that's happening now, where there's people from all walks of life really speaking out against racism and uniting as a community to try to see what can be done. And you can argue who is more sincere or more capable or what have you, but I just like seeing what I see in terms of the breadth of individuals, companies, even the police force. There's certain members of the police force taking a knee, public figures taking a knee, all of these symbolic things, and I think it's good. Unfortunately, we're not seeing it necessarily, from the leader of the country so much, but we are seeing it from some of the other areas like defense and all of those things. So I think, all of that really is good. It's unique of this time.
Well, I think the overall effect is good. And I think that...
And it's a starting point.
That many of the people out there we label as protesters are very good intended, and they're good. It's important that all races unite against an injustice to anyone. When we feel that an injustice, I think Martin Luther King said this, an injustice towards anyone is an injustice towards all of us.
Exactly.
And I think for the first time in recent years, this seems to be happening. I was watching TV of what was going on in Newport Beach. And there are all these young, upper-class white kids having a peaceful protest, and this car comes and drives into the crowd.
Oh, no.
Striking these young white kids and threatening some little kids, and there was this old man with a beard, a white guy, and they said he had this angry look on his face. And I was feeling, why are you hurting these kids? I mean, they're out doing good. So there are those that mean good, and we have to respect that.
Yes.
But at the same time, we want to be very careful that, we in this country talk about the right and the left. There are those on the left who want to do harm, and there are those on the right who want to do harm. And then there's the rest of the good people. And we know that there are these right-wing militias and real racists who want to do harm. They want to force black people to do nihilistic things that will get them killed. There are the extreme left-wing people who, by the same token, want to do civil disobedience and be nihilistic. That will get the rest of us killed. So we have to be very careful and follow our common sense and our heart and be very intentional about what we do. If somebody says, let's go burn down your own house, common sense will tell you not to do that.
Like, just stop. Let's not do that.
No. Let me say one more thing. Yeah. If they tell you to go burn down the house in the other people's neighborhood, you better think twice about that, because that might bring some retribution on you that you're not prepared to handle.
But
that
the other thing is why are you doing something to somebody else that you don't like for yourself?
Exactly.
You really, you don't necessarily have to say nothing, but you also don't have to be damaging. And I was actually having this conversation with a colleague, and it was very eye-opening. And they were saying, why do these people, I have to laugh because, sometimes people don't see me as these people. Why do these people have to protest like this, and there's all this violence? And I said, there's a different faction that is promoting the violence and the looting and things like that than the people who are protesting. It's like different groups, but it's this other group that's kind of taking the opportunity. And he said something profound. He said, how do you know the difference? How can you tell that it's different factions? And the interesting thing about it is it's really in the behavior, and that's what really makes it more of don't lump a group, right? Because everybody has a similar appearance in some way. You don't have to lump them, but you evaluate people on their behavior. If you see a group of people protesting, peacefully, those are the peaceful protesters. And if you see another group looting, that's another group. But don't say that they're the same because maybe they look similar to, other people in the other group.
But let me ask you a question.
Ooh, I like it.
A U.S. senator basically steals $20 million by doing insider trading while he's on a subcommittee on finance that knows that something is about to drop, and he illegally sells his stock and damages the market versus somebody who hasn't ever been able to buy a $1,000 TV and they have the opportunity to steal it. Which one is criminal?
I think they're both criminal. The difference is that one person is going to go to a country club jail and the other person's going to go to a bad jail.
Or no jail. The first one may go to no jail.
Or no jail. So the whole thing is you really have to, it's just, you have to be smart about what's in front of you and the consequences behind it. Now, some people, this was interesting too. That whole stunt that happened earlier this week with one of our public or political figures holding up a Bible in front of a church really got a lot of ire from some people in religion. And they were saying that, Jesus was a protester. He was a rebel. Jesus, if you believe in Jesus and the life that is documented, that was an individual who protested in his way, who had a group of followers, and they did things against what the commonalities and the norms of society were at that time. And it really wasn't until this religious leader started talking about this. I was fascinated by it. It was a Catholic priest who started talking about this. And if you think about it in those forms, there's ways of doing everything, right? There's ways of bringing about change. You may not see the exact change you want in your lifetime, but there's ways of making things happen and maybe preparing another person in the next generation. There's a lot of people who never got to see things like, Barack Obama as president or Hillary Clinton being close to being president, but they laid that groundwork for the future. Mm-hmm. And I think that we all have a role to play and we can find our role, You
reminded me of an interesting parallel.
Uh-oh.
That Jesus brought to fruition what was prophesied by the prophets of Judaism in the Old Testament. He was the fulfillment of that. He was saying that. In essence, he and his disciples believed that written in the Old Testament and prophesied was really true. Mm. So these protesters actually believed that the framers of the Constitution and the dream of the democracy of the United States was actually true. They believed it. It appears that people like the president and his group, they didn't believe it in the first place, and when it's about to come, they're like the Philistines and the other people who were against Christ for believing the predictions, and they don't want the fruition of the Old Testament, of the real document of the Constitution to come to pass. That was interesting to me. They're trying to stop it. They're trying to say that the Messiah does not exist. We did not really want to create equality. That's not true. So I think that there's a lot of parallel that you bring with that. And we do know.
That's an interesting spin on it. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. That's an interesting spin on that, too.
So they're trying to hold back what is destined to happen.
So it's interesting, to ask, okay, what can you do in a situation where there are, on one hand, a lot of stressors? And some stressors, let's face it, you brought on yourself, health practices, lack of exercise, incorrect diet, and all those things. Some stressors are societal, right? Some stressors are individual through relationships. You set yourself up in situations with bad relationships, lack of integrity, what have you. And then stressors due to finances. There's some people who are experiencing all of these stressors at one time. So what can a person do moving forward? Where can they go from here? What do you think? And I'm going to answer my own question after you answer it. But what do you think is one of the most important things people can do to find their way out of that heap of stress?
Like running to the emergency, don't.
Okay.
slow down, meditate, self-evaluate, determine where you are now, and when you know where you are now, you can start to determine how you can get to the place where you need to be. Now, part of the stress of knowing where you are now is concentrating on where you want to be, and you're not there. But when you really assess where you are now and learn how to deal with the situation that you are currently in, that will help you get to where you need to go. The journey to the other side of the country starts with the first step. When I tell people about...
In the right direction.
Right.
Right?
That's true.
Because there's the whole, paradigm of flying from L.A. to New York or Miami.
Yeah. So I had a lady...
If it's just a little bit off, you're going to end up in New York. And if it's on target, you'll end up in Miami.
I had a lady today who
better
had
weather.
a BMI, which is a ratio of height to weight, but it determines whether you're obese. And she was obese.
What was
Not
her BMI? Just for me, I want to know what the BMI was.
She was like 37.
Okay. That's bad. But that's
morbid obesity is 40.
I know. There's a patient.
Obesity is 30.
Listen, there's a patient who wanted me to operate on there. Their BMI was 50.
Oh.
50. And I just want to tell you guys, let me give you a correlation of what a BMI of 50 means. So we, in surgery, we will put people in the CAT scanner to show us what's going on inside the body, right? And it shows us the organs and their relationship and whether things going wrong. So you can also see the fat, right? The fat between the skin and the inner lining of the abdomen. And I actually measured that fat between the skin and the peritoneum. Now, normally, most people, they have maybe about this much, right? Hers was 10 centimeters, which is this much. That's a lot. And then you're trying to, and fat is the tissue that doesn't heal well. So, those of you who are morbidly obese, and sometimes you wonder, why are doctors always harping on this? It's not only things like the heart, can it withstand, surgeries or treatments, or you walking or things like that. It's not just the diabetes. It's not just the peripheral vascular disease, stroke risk, all of those things. It's also the quality of your tissues, being able to recover from accidents or surgeries or treatments that you need. And that fat also it also holds medications, and it holds some toxins. And it also defeats your ability to process insulin, which is how you properly manage glucose. So I got off on an obesity tangent.
But let me
story.
just take that.
I'm sorry.
Take that good. So one with the lady that had the BMI of 37.
Yeah.
She said, "Shall I lose 40 pounds?" I said, "No. You want to lose 40 pounds, but I'm going to be happy with just 10. Okay. I'm going to give her an achievable goal." But back to your issue of fat. Now, a lot of people
don't let me distract you, because I will talk about that all day and all night. I'm sorry.
That fat has more than, when a person is fat, they have more than 50 negative hormones produced by that fat in your body. Tumor necrosis factor, angiotensin 2, any number of things that increase all of your health risks. So
it's another organ.
It is.
The fat is another organ. Like your skin is an organ, that fat is another organ.
And it is deadly.
It is deadly.
It is extremely deadly.
Cancer risk, all of those things. And also hormones, which contribute to what? Stress.
And decrease in your immune system.
Indeed.
Now, stress, I'm told, is a form of a lack of faith.
Interesting. Okay.
And if that is so, and I believe it is, that if you have stress and if you have a lack of faith, then you have not bought into your own self-worth as being a child of God, and you've damaged your safety net. You've damaged your invulnerability to things, people, and situations.
What did you call that? Not the ground floor. You called it something else. The base. You called it something at the beginning.
It the ground floor.
Was it the ground floor?
Yeah.
You've damaged that ground floor, right? Your foundation. Right. And isn't there a saying, I've heard this saying, if you're going to worry, don't pray. But if you're going to pray, don't worry, right?
And I would even go so far as, why do you think people pray?
They pray because, well, there's a couple of camps. Don't ask me this question, because there's a couple of camps on prayer. Some people pray beseeching, begging. Oh, I want this. I feel bad, and I want this thing. And then there's other people who pray from the standpoint of, let me express my love and relationship with God or whoever I believe in. So there's different reasons for people praying. Some people pray to get, some people pray to let. So it depends on which group you're in.
I think that prayer is you convincing yourself that God is who he is. Because if God is omnipotent and all-knowing, as many of us believe he is, you don't have to ask him.
But it's not so much.
But you have to convince your own less than completely convinced self that this is true. Now, some people pray, like you said, of giving thanks, of giving glory, and not asking for anything, which is what I've learned to do.
Or just connecting. You just want to connect with a certain presence. And, some people, the prayer is centering. It's a method that some people use to say, look, I'm kind of all over the place right now. I'm stressed out or whatever. Prayer is almost like meditation.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing where you're trying to center down on a space where you can really, connect with yourself, because God is within everyone if you believe in God or Allah or whatever you believe in. So it's a way to center down. So that is a great coping mechanism in terms of stress.
So that is very important. I'm glad you brought that up. That is so important. I listened to a sermon, a rabbinical sermon, a few days back. And
rabbinical sermon, you mean it's
by a rabbi?
Thank you. Okay. Just for those of you who whose vocabulary is like mine. What is the rabbinical?
But and I don't normally listen to rabbis. Okay.
But
this was so profound. And that he gave the concept of, is there life after death? And he says, no, there's not life after death, because only the physical dies. But your soul, which is immortal, continues to live. So there doesn't need to be life after death in that sense. But you
because
always
the soul
have
is perpetual, is
that
what you're saying.
Warring tension between the soul of the body, so to speak, I don't know if that's grammatically correct, and the soul of the soul, which is immortal. But the whole point that I got from it is that your grounding, your comfort, your stressfulness of life resides in that immortal soul. So no matter what these people say or do, no what circumstance they put you in, you know that you have immortality. From a Christian standpoint, we know that all is temporary anyway.
So whether you're Christian, you're Jewish, whatever your faith is, there's an avenue for you there. And I just want to touch on one more thing before we close out, because we've gone through so many topics. We've talked about the pandemic. We've talked about the epidemic of health issues. We've talked about the whole civil unrest that we're seeing now as a result of inappropriate use of force from the standpoint of the police force. We've talked about economic stressors. We've talked about family stressors. We've talked about even obesity and how obesity can rev up some of the hormonal issues and cause a certain set of stressors. We even talked about financial stressors, and I just want to leave kind of a parting thought that nothing should prevent you from pursuing your goals in a sense of you self-actualizing. So whatever you feel like your purpose is, just because school might be difficult or maybe there's not enough money or whatever it is, there's always a pathway to get where you want to go. If you want a certain spouse, there's a way to get there. If you want a certain job, there's a way to get there. If you want just a certain peacefulness in life, there's a way to get there. So make sure that whatever it is that you want, that you're true to it and you stay on course. I really want to thank Dr. Maxey for being with us today and going through this discussion on mental health. Of course, there's way more for us to talk about, but at least I hope that we've gotten an opportunity to explore some things and given you some food for thought. Write in, let us know what you're thinking. Give us a call sometime. We're happy to hear from you. I'm Dr. Cutter, Surgical Oncology. This is Dr. Maxey from Nephrology, and this is Health from the Inside Out. Thank you.